Hi everyone. So welcome back to part two of our conversation with Siwe. In our last conversation, we were talking about indigenous food practices. Maybe Siwe, could you tell us a little bit about your story or journey regarding that topic?
Wow, the journey with indigenous foods. I guess it's this thing about developing language about certain things makes us become aware of the same things in a different way. So, for example, like indigenous food is just food to the people who are eating it, it's just regular, it's everyday things. So, it's only when I had moved to Joburg and met the Exotically Divine team, and they'd taken me on this incredible food tour where you can find foods from Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Nigeria, all within like 4 blocks, in the inner city, which is, really incredibly exciting actually for someone who's also into space and cities and design. So just seeing those two worlds kind of expressed together in that way was just so exciting for me, seeing the urban representation of African food or even just the African identity, because I think we speak a lot about that, understanding what our identity is, and food is obviously a huge part of that. But a lot of our foods were taken away from us through a lot of dispossession of the land, and that's kind of created this disconnect between us and the land and the food that grows from the land. Oftentimes people even have this perception that these indigenous foods or even just healthy foods, but specifically indigenous foods, they have the perception that they are poor man's food, like you only eat them if you're really desperate. But I think
Mm,
it's because of how we have internalized this rejection of nature somehow, in terms of what is growing wildly and naturally is kind of becomes suspect, or we don't trust it. We rather trust something that we
mm,
buy, in a box or a certain packaging. It has to look perfect. So I think this journey with indigenous food has just opened me up to that, my own perceptions of what is being an African, what are the things that I should be proud of, what are the things that make us unique, in within our identity, but in also how we express our identity. So it's yeah, it's been really interesting to also just find out how there's a lot of learnings like within nature. It's almost like things keep on giving, like just looking at a seed, that planting one seed can create 50 other seeds,
mm,
when you harvest, and that it just keeps on giving. Just seeing those cycles, and even looking at how connected we are as African people to just cosmic energies or even creation and the cycles of nature, knowing at what point to plant, sorghum, knowing that this certain type of bird means the rain is coming, knowing that these winds, that when they are blowing like this, or just knowing intuitively somehow, and just having this connection with the nature. And I feel like the
mm,
land is a big part of, being able to tap into that. So I'm very much into urban land. I really believe that we can still tap into nature even within our urban spaces, because this is where we are. This is where also a lot of our, you know great grandparents, even, they worked in the cities, they built these cities, the ones that we are walking on today. So it's still, it's our space, it's still, our home. And just that ability to be able to, we do nature walks where we like hike the city, just tapping into that thing of like, the lifestyle as well. What is the indigenous lifestyle? What did they used to do? They also used to hike. It's opened me up so much as well in terms of like the language, knowing what hiking is ngesiZulu, like kwala
mm,
intaba. I had never come across, those words, when I was growing up. But now exploring more of this lifestyle through the food has opened me up to so many other things, just tapping into knowing fermentation, in, the format that it is, and seeing how much it's part of our heritage, and just having the language to speak about that, or just feeling myself remembering certain things, even from certain tastes. There's a certain nostalgia that comes with things like
Mm.
fermented foods. We
Mm.
used to have this ching where they mix, like, before they brewing when they bring the sorghum beer, and before it gets too fermented, and they add like pumpkin, and it's so good. It's just like so heart filling and really warming food. So it just invokes that nostalgia as well, like trying to uh, tap into that thing of activating even our DNA, because these are the foods that
Mm.
like, ancestrally have been consumed. These are the foods that help to ensure that people didn't have diseases, because all of this food we are eating is causing that dis-ease within our body, whether it's through like inflammation or making our stomach work hard with all of the gluten and the wheat that we are eating, and our body's working hard to process these things. But when you look at even the practices of like indigenous foods and eating foods that take longer to cook, because that's important. We're eating grains, we're eating whole foods, real foods that take time. So it's just that idea as well of like trying to balance this urban reality with the indigenous lifestyle. And that's, I think, what's really exciting about the work that Exotically Divine is doing, and also what I'm trying to do with the bakery as well, to just make the this kind of lifestyle doable in an urban setting.
I what I find so fascinating is there's so many things here that I'm sort of ruminating on, in terms of what you're talking about. But immediately I think about, like, I love fermented foods, but I'm thinking about how, as part of the diaspora of, like, East Asian, Chinese, Taiwanese diaspora here in the West, in Canada, but and broadly in sort of Western countries, when these sort of culturally specific foods, like fermented foods, I'm thinking about like kimchi from Korea, or like natto, which is fermented soybeans from Japan. When those things get imported, it often, at least in my upbringing or growing up here in the West, is like seen as the other, right? It's seen as like really stinky. It's not sort of
Mm.
considered desirable or understood as food. So there's often this sort of weird relationship to these culturally specific foods, and then what we've noticed, or what I've noticed over the last couple of decades, around like the re-colonization of these foods, um, when like white people sort of use them in their diet, or like I'm thinking about like quinoa, right? And the sort of
Mhm.
that and how quinoa has played a role in the destruction of the land, right?
Mm.
Mm.
Because white people are all of a sudden really interested in quinoa. Yeah, so I don't really know where I'm going with this necessarily, but I think it's a really interesting relationship to like food culture, colonization, land, and all of
Mm.
that. Yeah, but yeah,
Mm.
I love all things fermented. It's so good for the
What I've
gut
noticed,
biome.
what I've noticed is the moment something becomes popular, like you were
Yeah.
saying about the fermented thing, very quickly it becomes unsustainable in the way it's
Mm.
produced. And not just in
Mm.
terms of food, in terms of something like, I practice yoga, it's one of my favorite practices. And the way yoga has been twisted from what it began as to this weird, almost very sexualized thing that it is now, owned mainly by very thin white women who deny the spiritual aspects of the practice when it was always a spiritual practice. The minute you sort of, yeah, the minute too many eyes are focused on something, it loses um its sustainability. Not that it loses its goodness, but it almost deviates from the path. And that's something I think is very creative about what Exotically Divine is doing, because the combination of the urban and the past indigenous food is done in a way that doesn't exploit the culture or the food. And I think that's such a critical thing going forward, when we reintroduce these ways of eating and living and moving to the rest of the world, right? When you
Mm,
have those eyes on those practices and those ways of eating and healing, part of that message, I think, very strongly, while it should be you are welcome, join us in living and eating and consuming and loving this way, part of that message also has to be, but respect the space too. And I don't feel
mm,
as if enough of our indigenous foods, whether you're talking about Asian food, African foods, or spiritual practices, have received that kind of, I don't know, disclaimer, caveat when they enter the world, that
mm,
yes, join us, walk with us, but tread carefully
Mm.
because there's history here and there should be respect here. And I never see enough of that come through when
Mm.
movements like this explode into the world, you know?
mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
I,
yeah.
yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. I'm just trying to just rationalizing in my mind kind of the scale of the big corporate supermarket type of lifestyle that we have bought into, that's actually been forced on us actually,
Mm,
just in the way that we have now, we just buy most of our food from supermarkets. That's just the setup, and they've made it easy for us to be able to do that. There's one on every corner, and there's, the whole idea of convenience and all of those things. And but then
Mm,
when you look, those are mostly like the, the white owned farm owners and all of those things who still have, control of the land and have certain type of produce that they want to be putting into the markets, which also suits their economy, their pockets, even their lifestyle. But if we
mm,
also look now to this other side of the alternative food markets, which is what I'm calling it in my research, where I'm mapping where to find indigenous African foods within the city of Joburg and what those foods are, what the benefits of those foods are, and how they get into the country, because there's also a huge economy around this. So I
mm,
mm,
think it is valid to want to tread carefully in the space of like trying to popularize these African foods, but I'm also quite confident that this is our space and we can make our mark on it and we can design it in the way that we want to, because these are the ones that are actually currently African owned. The merchants that are selling these things, the ones that are importing
mm,
these foods, the ones that are growing these foods, mostly rural women. So there's a huge economy there that directly creates this image of what I think is the future of the African economy, which is us trading with each other. I was just looking at this
mm,
label of peanut butter that I bought, which I thought was Zimbabwean because it's being sold by these Zimbabwean ladies. And then when I look at the packet, it says Zimbabwean products manufactured in South Africa. And those are the type of labels that I want to be seeing. Those are the things that I want to engage with. That it's a Ugandan
mm,
product that's made in Kenya. These things make sense because we are, you know, bordering on each other.
mm,
So even the thing of like, um,
mm,
certain negative perceptions that we have of these foods, that they smell and they do certain things or whatever, that's also okay. But there's those that this message is for, those who resonate with what, these foods can do, or those who resonate with the ideals of this pan-African society where we are trading with one another, we get along with each other, we trade, and we have this relationship of knowing each other's food as well. So those are the kinds of people that I think we'd want to attract in this kind of future space, because we,
mm,
it can be, it's very draining for you to try and be convincing people all the time. You just need to continue sharing that message, and those who hear it, they will yeah, they can resonate with the message if it does. But yeah,
mm,
uh, there's a very big economy that I think we can miss out on if we continue like to play small or just see African food as like being on the periphery, like, oh no, it's just meant for us to do this and that. We can also create those economies that empower and enrich us, like based on our food and our lifestyle and our type of, community that we want to create, and the type of businesses with respect, with integrity, with honesty, people that really care for the people that they are serving in the community, which is something that you won't find within this huge supermarket and capitalist version of and food is so spiritual. It's so important, I think, to have someone who really cares for you giving this food to you, who will tell you, hey, rinse these beans a bit extra, they look a certain way, or do this and that, maybe freeze this one, or they give you the extra things that are going to spoil just because you're always buying there, or they give you things extra. You don't get that in the supermarket. You are not going to get that. So I want to put my money where I'm seen. I want to back my money in that, where someone remembers me and they know my name, and it's the money is going to this person. It's going to directly help them, versus this like anonymized big conglomerate type of food system that we end up having.
Yeah. Siwei, I'm thinking about two things. You were talking earlier about food practices and tapping into nostalgia and the senses as tapping into our DNA. And this has been a lot of a concept that Jen and I have also been exploring recently. In fact, tonight we're going to be hosting an event using an activity to stimulate conversation using medicine and herbs. Um, but it's making me think, and I share this story a lot. My aunts, so my dad has four sisters, and my aunties always they very much followed like traditional Chinese medicine, and so they would every week, every single week, they would bring me, they would drop off like a different soup, a Chinese soup, which is essentially like a tonic or a medicine. And I think about it a lot because, at the time, it was just a soup that I had to have. But the act of doing it, the heating of it up, the whole house smelling of it, it really does, as you're mentioning, like tap into this sort of epigenetic, intergenerational um, sensation, but also spirit, if you will, that's in our bones, right? That we carry in our bones. And I'm also thinking of, I don't know why this is this I'm thinking about this, but in thinking about this topic of like medicine, I've been I follow a bunch of Chinese creators on TikTok that do work around or make content on Chinese medicine. And it was amazing to see how, like, in many hospitals in China, like you'll get a prescription for your like Western diagnosis, but it's also paired with the Chinese medicine prescription,
Mm.
and then you'll get dispensed both. And I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's obviously in the diaspora. I don't live in China, but it was just incredible to also just see that, like, because in the way that when I buy my Chinese medicine in Chinatown, it feels like something that's outside of dominant society
Mm.
when I'm doing these practices. And so seeing it, seeing these content creators show that it's actually like very much, a common practice in China, really sort of just made me think about, yeah, my relationship to medicine and food in a different way. And in terms
Yeah.
of
I
like
love
relationship, yeah.
Mm. Mm.
I think I've
That's
seen
beautiful.
something around one of the doctors that you're speaking about had prescribed actually go outside and take a walk in nature, be in the sun, which is also
Yes,
another, just that dose of like sunlight, being out in the natural world is its natural, healing on its own, which
yeah,
is so incredible. Even just how it begins to tap into that like cycle of how nature is healing, and plants come from nature, and the medicine that we're eating, the food that we're eating comes from
yeah,
nature. This, beautiful cycle that, the healing is available all
yeah.
around us.
I think they call
Mm.
it it's forest bathing is the
Forest.
Oh,
prescription.
nice.
But is this a term that's coined by white people? Like, I don't
I think so.
know.
Being outside. Forest bathing.
Yeah.
My dream would be to go to a doctor in South Africa who is trained in like traditional Western medicine, right? But then is also able to look at me and say, I also think spiritually you could heal this way, and psychologically let's look at this. Like someone who can offer you that sort of holistic overview of everything you have that wounds you,
Yeah.
understands how it's connected, and is willing to engage on that level. Because I think a lot of people have the ability, but so many people have been shamed around that. And African medicine and African spiritual practice, particularly, is still considered as something embarrassing and like, oh, you're so backwards. Why would you participate in that? Why are you there? But there's so much value to be gained in the lessons that I've started reading about, and meeting people and speaking to people about, the way we eat, we heal, the way we prescribe the medicine that heals you, and then doing my own work in terms of like herbal remedies. Like I had severe eczema, for instance, for 2 years. I was covered in eczema. It was in my eyes. I couldn't sleep. I could barely like exist. It was horrific. And I healed myself with herbs. I read up about herbs and I made things and I concocted. I, I spoke to people. I spoke to people about where does this kind of wound come from? What is hurting me that I'm not seeing and that Western medicine is not helping me with? And I got my answers from African spiritual healers, and I found my way to health through that. And I just
Mm.
wish there were more places, where people would say to you, right, so physically and scientifically do this, this, and then psychologically this, and then spiritually maybe this practice, like go sit in the sun or avoid the sun, or like Jen was saying, don't drink cold things when you're on your period. Stuff like that. It's simple, but it does the job. It goes the distance. I'd love
Yeah.
I'd love for that to be our future. That'd be
Mm.
amazing.
Yeah.
Siwe, can you tell us about how people in South Africa, on the African continent, across the world, can engage with you, your work at Exotically Divine, at your bakery? How do you invite people to participate and be a part of this movement and to support you?
Yeah, the first way is by following Exotically Divine Pulse on Instagram. Please check out our work there at exotically divine underscore pulse. So that's where you'll also see a lot of the work that we are doing at the drill hall mainly, and the work that we are doing in other spaces that we also go to. You can also find Exotically Divine on Facebook as well, and on LinkedIn. And for Zimtoti Bakery, I will be opening my little home bakery cafe very soon. I'm not going to say exactly when yet. So please check out my
Yay.
website, www.co.za. And that's where you can order from me. And that's also where you can subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay in touch with what we're up to and the events that we are hosting. We are also at Zimtoti Bakery on Instagram and TikTok. Please do, yeah, follow and share our work. And especially if you want to be part of the community, if you want to volunteer with Exotically Divine Pulse, please do send a DM and we would love to have you and host you. Yes, we're a community, so we're always open to having people and hosting people at the drill hall. So please, yeah, you can come through and share energy, and we can take you around.
Great.
Nice.
Thank you so much,
Perfect.
Siwe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And thank you,
Thank
Namande, as well for co-hosting with us. Yeah, we'll
My
see you
pleasure.
we'll see you next time on our next episode of Hot Pot Talks. Thanks, everyone.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.